taking an unconventional look at stocks, property, bonds, economics, and more. This is the Total Money Management Podcast with Steve Moriarty, Tom Hill, and Jacob Senior.
All right, hey guys, we're back at Total Money Management. My name's Jacob. I'm here again with Tom and Steve. How you going, gents?
Fresh back from the tennis that we talked about.
Very
ran over 2 weeks.
Leave it alone.
All right.
Look, we're back. We're reviewing the week that was and some really key points that we feel like investors should be aware of. And we might just kick off with how incredibly insane the PE is. In fact, 8 times higher than international stocks in the US at the minute.
Hallelujah, brother.
Or at least the time of this recording anyway, which if you're listening to it this time in a couple of years, it could be totally different.
Absolutely.
That's
where my money is.
Wasn't it less than 4 times back in 2008?
Would have been.
Or was that .com?
What, the US was cheaper or?
No, so obviously that stat Jacob's talked about is the PE of the US in relation to other international markets.
Yeah.
Relative to other markets.
Yep.
8 times now. But, you know, in
It
the
was
last
less than
big
4
crash that
times.
everyone's still recovering from.
The GFC.
Yeah.
I think it was less than 4 times around 2008, which would be the GFC, and in the dot-com bubble would have been higher, but still not as high as this.
Also,
.com was about 44 and now it's at 32 and a half or something. But hey, to be quite honest, it's a bit like, right, okay, so it's a difference between a 3% return or a 2.5% return. Still expensive in my, still high risk in my book.
Well, it's the Magnificent Seven, and I actually said it right this time, so part of that back
well
to me.
done.
Those guys together combined is worth more than the entire GDP of every country in the world other than China and the US.
It's just insane. Honestly, you think about how insane that is.
Well, on that note, this is how much money they've got. One of them, so Amazon, it wouldn't be Amazon, it'd be Blue Sky, I think, with the Jeff Bezos. If you haven't listened to the podcast that's just out, it's actually really good. He's talking about how they're going to build space stations just in the orbit of Earth, and they're going to mine all these rocks and from the asteroid belts outside of Jupiter or whatever, and that's how they're going to build off civilization or off-world civilizations to maintain the integrity of the world that we live on. But what I took from that is
for the rich people. Yeah. So all the poor people are going to be in space.
Yeah, all the poor people will be on space stations, and then Bezos will live on Earth. That'll be Bezos world. But what I took from that was, Jesus, you got a lot of cash, mate.
Isn't Elon apparently going to go and mine more gold from space than we've ever seen, and then gold will be worth nothing because there's going to be so much gold that he gets?
All for Elon.
The big issue is space. Pippa Malmgren, who's really good, geopolitics, and I linked her stuff in a newsletter a few months ago, but she's really good on this stuff. She's got a podcast called Pippa's Pen and Podcast, and you have to, a bit of a mouthful, but what she's saying we've got a hot war in coal places, right? So it's really clever. Hot war between the US and China and Russia and Iran in coal places, right? There's a lot of stuff going on in the Arctic, in the top and the bottom of the world, because the theory is with global warming, and it's doing pretty well, all the ice sheets will melt. So those routes that were previously unable to be done by a ship can then be done because there's no more sea ice, right? So they can, it's like, an ice cube melts and it's like, oh, now I can drink it. So what Russia is planning for is to use a lot of the northern routes because there won't be any ice left, which is fairly bleak. But also, too, there's a ton of, they believe there's a ton of resources up there.
Well, it's untouched for many thousand
and they can
years.
access it. And then she says, which is really clever, there's a Cold War in hot places and there's a hot war in cold places. And the other one is space. What she's saying is you've got to understand that, Bezos and Elon Musk and all these dudes who love rocket ships and stuff is all deeply connected to satellites and stuff like that. So the satellites in space connect up around Norway, right, in the top of the Arctic. That's the point. If you knock out the Arctic, you knock out all the satellites.
Yeah, I find it fascinating now that it's not necessarily countries or America. It's not a space race between US and Russia, for example. It's a space race between companies and people.
But companies have always been co-opted for national security reasons. That's why you've got all the oil majors, right? That's why oil companies are so important, because for the last 100 years, if you didn't have energy, it was really hard to develop, right? And that's what Europe's got at the moment, right? Because they've been relying on cheap Russian energy. Now that Russia's said, and they're at war, the Europeans are going to struggle because they don't have an internal energy source.
Yeah, well, it's a resource battle off-world, right? So instead of relying on Russia for your energy, you're going to rely on Elon for your energy. And he's going to mine it all from Jupiter. You know what I mean? Like, they're disguising it with the betterment of humankind. And I know we're going massively off on a tangent here, but I find it fascinating. They're disguising it for the betterment of humankind, but it's really just to see how many resources they can get.
Yeah. But you think of the impact, and this is what we were talking about in the last episode. The impact on investors is enormous, right? Is enormous. Critical mineral companies are going to be hotter than Hades, and the argument is we'll get in when they're at 2 cents a share rather than at $6. And I can use my own experience with Linus. I bought Linus originally at 45 cents.
Yeah.
Right, and now I think it's at $7 or something, but it was at $11. Right, that's where you look at it and say, well, gee, you don't need too many of those to do all right. And that's what's a lot of those sort of front running is going on about critical minerals, rare earths, graphite, lithium, AI is deeply connected, semiconductors, right, to make missiles, all of that sort of stuff is all bound up in national security. Your iPhone, most of the parts of the iPhone were created by the American military research technology stuff. Right? It wasn't Steve Jobs, and we've talked about this before. It wasn't him who went, I've got this really great idea. It was, here's all the technology. We can take it off the American military for free and,
develop it,
put it in a phone, touch screen, blah, blah, people are going to love it, right? Bingo, there you go. But no one talks about, but it was the government that actually did it, Steve. You exploited it, no problem, that's great, but it was the government who did it.
Can't even imagine what the PE of these companies would be once we do crack space. It would.
Well,
9,000.
It'll be a weird world, because if you think about the way we've got bubbles in, and I can tell you that when the internet came out, it was, anything with .com, bingo. Look at AI last year.
Yeah.
Right? And I can tell you with rare earths, companies went from being gold miners to going, oh my God, look, there's a spot of terbibium. Oh, we're now a rare earth company. Put that on the stock exchange, right? Stock goes from 20 cents to $3. That's what they do.
I tried that with rubies and got burned.
Yeah, but that's what I mean, though. You see what I mean?
Like,
Mustang.
That's what happens.
Oh, right? Rubies are good. I'll put all my cash here and then, see you later, bankrupt.
Mate, 500 years ago, they were buying bloody tulips.
Yeah.
I mean, goddamn tulips, like plant poles. I mean...
That tulip bubble's fascinating, hey?
But that's what I mean. You honestly look at the bubble psychology, and this is why we talk about it a lot, because you don't realise you're in it, right? Steve, property's tripled in 20 years, mate. You don't get it. And it's like, mate, I get it. I took part on it in the first 5 or 10 years, but it doesn't go forever, right? You can talk about immigration and, all of this stuff. I think, Jacob, you had a entry there about the economy, right?
Yeah.
It's piss weak.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to touch on the entry first on the on the Australian Ponzi property market, because there's a fascinating article in this week's The Week That Was going out to the subscribers.
Yeah.
Just on how it's almost a marketing tool now. If you're anyone in property and their mates are just marketing to everybody else, it's like an MLM scheme. If you've got two houses, you need to get 4 by the end of the year and tell your mates about it.
Have a dinner party with your friends and get them to buy a property off you.
Yeah, and it's just we touched on it on last week's podcast, so we won't spend a lot of time on it now. But we're just relying on capital gains to get us through the mud. Really, like we're not actually acknowledging the fact there's no yield. Interest rates, we can't borrow, so we're using guarantors and benefactors to get us into the market.
Mum and dad
and whoever else. And we're just going hands together and praying for this $1 million property to now be worth 1.5 in a couple of years.
Yep.
But what happens if it doesn't?
You guys remember this as gym junkies. Remember about 5 years ago, there was the thing the National Bank were using gym instructors to pump their loans.
Oh, really? No.
Don't you remember that?
I wasn't a gym junkie then. Right?
Yeah. Well,
Couch potato.
This is the influencer stuff.
Yeah.
Right? And there was, I think it was the National Bank, forgive me if I'm wrong, but the banks were using like personal trainers and stuff like, oh, Tom, you should be looking at property, mate, blah, blah. Talk to my friend Bob at, ABC Bank to get a loan. I mean, that's the world we're in.
God.
And, you imagine that, like last week we were joking about AI and stuff, but it's seriously, how the hell are you going to establish between the legitimate and the deep fake?
Sell or be sold?
Hey, well, but it's just really, really weird.
Yeah, well, this statement here in the article is interesting. Any investment that's primarily reliant on capital gain rather than future income generation for its return shares at least one thing in common with a Ponzi scheme. Both rely on the next investors to pay out the profits of the earlier ones.
Yeah, because you're losing money on purpose.
And everyone's negatively geared.
Yep. Howard Marks talks about that in, what was it, not a newsletter?
No, it was his essay to Oak Tree clients.
It was the easy money one, right?
Yeah.
If you haven't had a look at that, I mean, we might share it on socials or on the website or something.
It's easy
to access,
free to obtain.
It's a long read, but it's definitely worth talking about. I mean, we've been talking about a lot of this stuff for best part of 12 months anyway. So it's just nice to have a bit of validation from one of the best investors
confirmation
ever. We're not barking totally up the wrong tree. One of the best investors to walk the planet.
He's a billionaire.
Yeah, agreeing with us, or not agreeing with us, but coming up with his own rationale. So, yeah, is there anything that pops out in there? I'm just reading through it myself now, but
Howard takes a historical perspective, right? And that's why I say, and we talked about it last week, that's why it's been really important to know history because, Tom, we were talking about the presidential elections, right? And you've got to get the gradations or the context right. With if low PE, buying low PE stocks works most of the time. There are times when it doesn't work, right? And what you try to do is go, okay, tell me when it doesn't work, right? And most of the time you will find it is when valuations are high. And even Howard Marks says, and I know this because it's in our coaching course, Howard Marks says, if you buy a cheap stock in a cheap market, you'll probably do really, really well. If you buy a cheap stock in an expensive market, what you're doing is saying the market's going to fall, but my stock is going to go up. Right? It doesn't work like that. Generally, what happens is if you buy it cheap enough and you hold on through the bottom part of the bear market and it bounces back, that's when you make a lot of money. But you make a lot of money by buying stuff when it's cheap. When everything's cheap, you make a lot of money by buying everything. And that's what we talk about with the indexes.
I think that is an important thing to kind of highlight, right? Because, listening to these, it could probably be pretty easy to get confused because, on one hand, we talk about how overly expensive the market is, but then we also talk about there's plenty of really good value opportunities out there. And, another thing we seem to harp on about a lot is the asset allocation, right?
Yes.
So whilst we anticipate that something big may happen, that doesn't mean that when we see a really cheap company or a really cheap sector that we're not going to buy it.
Absolutely.
Because we don't know when it'll pop. Plenty of time to make money on it. If there isn't, that's where the asset allocation comes in.
Yeah.
Because if it's worth $10 and you get to buy it for $4 and it drops to $2, even better.
You can buy more. Yeah.
Correct.
Exactly.
If you've still got cash.
Yeah.
There.
And it happens in two ways. One, like we talked about with oil a couple of years ago when it was cheap, right? But that's just oil. The Cape was still at like 30 or something, right? Or when everything's cheap. And if you look at a couple of countries, China, Jacob, your home territory, the UK, right?
Yeah.
It's the Cape is about 14.
Are you from Scotland?
Oh, get off it.
Wales?
What a disgusting.
It's all
I'm
the
leaving.
it's all the United Kingdom, isn't it? Just all that area up there.
Oh, you guys are disgusting.
It's all cold and terrible food.
I'm going to change the topic. I'm not going to change the topic. I'm going to talk about and a good example on the China note, where we talk about. We've just been talking about cheap things in an expensive market, and last week we discussed how cheap China was, and it might be worth having a little bit of a gander. But what we're saying is, if the US is super expensive, if that absolutely tanks next year or this year, China will go down with it. What Tom's just saying is, if you had 100 grand, you might put 20 grand into China at the minute, and then wait for the US to absolutely capitulate, and then start to feed. And just reassess your asset allocation into China. It's not about putting 100K in China and you're like, oh, well, shit now. The US has capitulated. I've got no money left.
Yep.
It's about looking at the macro picture and going, okay, if the US sneezes, everyone else catches a cold, as we said a few times.
Yep.
But I do like the look of China, but I'm going to feed some cash in. I'm going to look at my asset allocation and feed some cash into China when it makes sense. And if it drops even further, I think it's a PE to 10 now. If it goes to a PE of 8, I might put an extra bit of cash in. And then just start to ride that bottom out, which might be 2, 3, 4 years, and then get a nice little run.
Yep.
Because what we've seen in the past is when international stocks do really well, emerging markets do really crap. So we've got the US, which has had an absolute boomer of a run for the last 10 years.
Yep.
Is it likely to have another boomer of a run for the next 10 years? Who knows? However, there's a better chance based on history that emerging markets like your China, like your Singapore, like your Hong Kong will start to do better.
Yep.
Not Hong Kong, they're bloody international, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And only I'm not agreeing from a basis of that's what I reckon. I'm agreeing from the basis of go back and look at history.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why we've also talked about gold. Right. Gold. I don't know much about gold. Right. And
it's nice and shiny.
And I don't even get it. Right. People are like, you got to buy gold. Well, okay. What do I go to the shop if the world goes to hell in a handbasket? The worst thing I've got, like people are like, you got to buy gold. And to me, it's like, mate, if the world's going to hell in a handbasket, I'm just going to go and steal stuff. Right? I'm not going to go and say
Steve Moriarty, everybody
is a thief.
No, but you know what I mean. Like people do that stuff where it's like, if it all goes to hell, you buy gold, and it's like, mate, I just want to buy toilet paper and food, right? Like I'm not worried about making money. I'm worried about staying alive.
Yeah.
But my point being, gold historically is uncorrelated with stocks. And and as I said, we teach this in the course. When you look at stocks, when they do really well, gold doesn't do that well. And when gold does really well, i.e. the 70s in inflationary times, stocks didn't do well. Okay, well, that's what we got going on. And if you follow the decades, you sort of look at it and go, actually, well, I should have some gold because stocks are really expensive. Oh, well, that's one point. Stocks have had a really great 10 years in the US. Okay, that's 2 points. All I'm doing is looking at probabilities and history with the principles that we talk about, mean reversion, asset allocation, rebalancing, and say that's all you have to do. It's not rocket science. It's just looking at stuff and again saying this connection between but that's not my experience. And it's like, Steve, you haven't been alive for 200 years.
Yeah.
You're just a statistical outlier like we all are. And I look at that and say, well, am I saying I'm right and, the market is offering terrible return, but I'm right and I think I'm going to make lots of money? It's like, okay, well, that's fine, but...
What's the first rule of investing? You start to get arrogant and... So it's psychology, right?
Yeah.
You start to get arrogant. You think you think you're best. You might have had a great 3 years.
I've done all right
you think
so
you're
far.
A genius.
Yep.
Next minute, you've got no money left.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens. And it's really hard because, as I said in the last episode, I've been in a bubble. It is absolutely impossible to tell me I'm in a bubble and I'm not a bloody genius, right? And what do? All you do is listen to people like you.
Who agree with you. Yeah.
To validate
and tell
your-
you that, that stock that you bought at 30 cents, it's now $3. Mate, it's going to be worth $12 in 3 years, right? And I'm thinking, man, I am going to retire rich in the Bahamas, right?
He'll be joining Elon on his spaceship.
But yeah, I'll be having my own rocket. But it's true, and that's the psychology, dare I say it, and I'm only going to say it once on this episode. That's what's going on in property.
Yeah.
Okay, talk about something else. I don't mind.
Well, I wanted to talk about the
Property? You want to talk about property?
not property again, please. I wanted to talk about how people get compounding so wrong.
Yes,
talked
yeah.
about
Oh,
it.
did you see that?
We,
Yes.
Yeah, we talked about it in.
What's don't mention who it is, but what's that? Read the tweet.
Yeah, so as we start 2024, now is the time to start investing. If
Always see that?
now is the time.
Now is the time,
Now is
Jacob.
the time.
Do not wait, son. Now
Yeah.
is the time.
Yesterday is the time.
All right.
If you didn't do it yesterday, when's the best time to plant a tree?
Now. Right
Or,
now.
or 100 years ago?
Yeah. As soon as the stock market opens on Monday, I want you to run down and put all your money in it.
Insane. So yeah, if you invest $100 a week, by 2030 you will have 40,000. By 2040 you'll have
Jesus.
200,000.
Holy, this is
very
get-
definitive. Or by 2050 you'll have 600,000. The longer you wait, the harder it is to catch up. So now is the time to get started. Steve, over to you.
Well,
Why is that wrong?
but the simple fact is, first of all, it doesn't have taxes, fees, and charges. It doesn't have inflation,
Yep.
and compounding doesn't. Anyone tell me where their stocks have gone up exactly 10% every single year with zero volatility? Right? It's completely wrong. If you start at a Cape of 44, well, best of luck getting bloody 600,000 by 2050.
That's 26 years.
That's what I'm saying. This is the stuff that is put out there about compounding, right? Oh, Tom, if you start at 15, you'll be a zillionaire by joining Elon on his rocket by the time you're 45, right? It's bullshit because there's nothing compounds in a straight line, right? I don't know if you know that. Do you know that old chessboard one with the grain of rice? The old, there's that old.
Yeah, on the first square,
Yeah, you put one grain and
by
then
the
you
end of it, you feed
You got
a
more
country
fucking,
or something.
You got more fucking rice than China or something. But the point being, yeah, because you don't get to square 22 and then lose half the grains,
yeah.
right? Like everybody did in 2007, 2008, right? And they go, I've got fucking 500 grains. Oh, Jesus, now I've only got 250
Yeah,
grains.
got to start again now.
It's monopoly, right?
Well, if you could double your money every square,
Absolutely. And, that is so doable. Right?
Yeah,
Have I
according to
told you
this-
about my AI and property program you should be listening to?
According
Sounds
to this
valuable.
tweet. Well, how does it really happen then?
But it's true. What I'm saying is, when you got to use the geometric return, not the average return,
Yep.
right? And this is why I say this is the point about compounding. If you compound at 15% per year, you'll be rich, right? In a short space of time, and you'll be rich in a long space of time. If you compound at 2% per year, you ain't going to be rich in a shorter space of time, and you ain't going to be rich in a long space of time. Right, because if you use the rule of 72, compound at 2%, I go on about this all the time.
yeah, every 4.5 years or something.
36 years to double your money.
Yeah.
If you compound at 14.4%, you get rich in 5 years, you double your money. Okay, start tomorrow. Okay, we'll start tomorrow. What's
What?
the compound rate?
Yeah. Start tomorrow at a cape at 32 or start tomorrow at a cape at
Exactly.
5.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. And that's why I say to people, one good bull market in stocks, if you know what you're doing, you'll be well, right?
Yep.
If you bought in 2009 or if you've got a strategy that focuses on buying the cheap markets, that works because of the compounding. It's not about,
Just throwing your money into it every week.
yeah, and about time.
Yeah.
It's not saying I've invested for I know plenty of people who've invested for a long time and they're not wealthy. Why? Because the compounding it doesn't run at 10% year in and year out. The ASX has gone nowhere from 2007.
Yeah. I mean,
We're now into 16 years where we still haven't recovered to the peak. And people will say, oh, yeah, but you put more money in. Well, yeah, but that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
The return's still bloody miserable.
And it leads on to the next topic, which is more about the economy. But who now realistically has an extra $100 a week to put into the market? Not many people. And if you have an extra $100 a week,
$5,200.
Yeah, if you have an extra $100, you're not going to be looking to do that every. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't make sense.
It's just guff.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly,
the time's now. All right, we're at all-time highs.
The time is
$4,839 for the S&P 500.
Yeah.
Highest it's ever been. Buy now, mate.
Yeah.
Compound at 10% a year.
Oh,
And if you look at history, we spend 5% of the time at the all-time highs. So what does that tell you? It tells you that it may not be going to spend all that time. Now, it could go on for a year, absolutely. And in fact, I think in shorter term, things don't look too bad, right? There's lots of liquidity. There's lots of people borrowing money, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't mean you're going to make lots of money for the next 10 years.
Yeah. I think I've seen, this is the first time actually I've started to see people start to spend a little bit less, just general observations. And obviously you gents know that this week I've been down at the tennis, but what they've done...
Oh, have you, mate?
It's very fancy. But what I'd noticed were people were sat around in the oval, not really doing much, not eating, not drinking, just kind of sitting and watching.
Yep.
And usually you go to somewhere like that and everyone's pissed. Everyone's got 6 beers in their hand, they've got food, and they're all
Melbourne Cup Day every day.
Yeah, and look, you had those people, but it wasn't crazy this year. And it was probably because a pint, or not even a pint, something this big, like a little schooner, was about $18. So you look at that and you go, oh, well...
That's a lot though, isn't it?
Well, that's exactly my point. That's exactly my point. Inflation's hit the beers now, and people aren't willing to spend that on discretionary items, and we're starting to see people going for the main thing, which is to watch the tennis, and not do the secondary thing, which is to get drunk,
nosh it up, and
And I was like, that's the first time actually I've seen that in a couple of years since the rate hikes and things like that.
Right.
Well, that wasn't from your ivory tower, though.
That was
just your seats,
from
the
his
leather seats,
from his corporate box.
That was from my corporate box.
Yeah.
I still have beers.
I'll have another champagne, Jeeves. I know.
You guys should have this. It's really good.
Start trading now.
Yeah. Here's my Instagram post on it. Jacon, isn't it? Jacon the influencer. But all seriously, it's true. I think it's starting to. And I think, Tom, we were talking just before about the rate cut stuff, where the US has priced in something like 7 rate cuts, right, this year. The economy in the US is going absolutely gangbusters.
But inflation hasn't been going up as fast in the States right now as it is here.
Yeah, but they still say, the argument is, the economy will tank and they'll cut rates. Won't that be fantastic? I mean, my logic is, Jesus, no, you don't want the economy to tank because there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be out of work, right? And this is why I keep saying, if you look at Australia's last 20 years, wages have gone nowhere and property prices have gone through the roof. You've got to pay the debt back from the income. And if the income is not there, then what you're doing is speculating. But my point being, that's why our economy is doing really poorly, because there's so much debt. Everybody's taking lunches, everybody's taking ham sandwiches to the tennis and not buying the strawberries and cream because it's really tough.
Yeah.
Right? And people are cutting back. So the economy's falling, but we've got this false sort of signal because people are going, but property prices are rising. And it's like, because everybody's just borrowing and doing debt crazy stuff. Right? Or they're borrowing from their parents or their Chinese money or Indian money. And that's what I'm saying. You get misled by saying things are all right. I've been to the tennis. I went to a Taylor Swift concert, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's the people who can afford it.
I didn't know you liked Taylor Swift.
I don't.
Oh, sounds like you.
But my point being, the other thing too, where they say, that Taylor Swift generates, $1 billion of income from the tour. And it's like, no, because someone else lost $1 billion because instead of saying, I'm going to go to the restaurant for a week or I'm going to go to Taylor Swift, I'm going to Taylor Swift. So the restaurant missed out. So in other words, there's no actually additional economic activity.
It balances out. Yeah,
it's only from debt, right? What's the big debts at the moment?
Property.
Right? And so that's what's driving the stuff, even though the economy's not doing that well. And it's a classic sign of property and stock bubbles when that happens, right? Because eventually you have to pay the loan from the income, right? And if you're negatively geared, like we talked last week, you're already losing $300 a week. But it's okay because the capital value's going up 500. But when the
For
interest,
now.
yes, exactly. But at some point, you say, well, hang on, the capital value is no longer rising, so now I'm losing more money. So, but if Albo comes through with the stage 3 tax cuts, people, I suspect, may well choose to pay down some debt. Well, if you pay down the debt, that means you've got $100 less to go to the restaurant. So that's why the economy's not doing that well.
Yeah, they're purposely slowing the economy, I think, now. It's either that or there's mass capitulation.
Well,
they're trying anyway.
to slow it.
Yeah.
I think so.
Well, no. Well,
they're trying to slow
the Reserve Bank's
the
trying to
spending,
slow
right?
it.
Yeah.
Albanese and Chalmers are trying to keep it going.
Yeah, well, yeah.
That's where you look at it and go, this is ridiculous. The Reserve Bank's out there trying to kill inflation and Albo's trying to give us all money. Why? Because of inflation. And it's like, but if you give us money, inflation will stay high because we'll just keep spending.
Yeah.
And then the Reserve Bank will... So, do you know what I mean?
Well, it's just a fight, isn't it? Well, to your point, I think couple of months ago, you said we can either do it the Japanese way, which is slow and painful for the next 20 years, or we can do it the American way, which is we capitulate and start
in 12 months and it gets real ugly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we'll yet to see what happens.
Yep.
All right. Well, we might end on that, gentlemen, but thanks again for joining us. Listeners, if you have any questions, head to the website. If you have any questions about Well 1, Well 2, Well 3, or some of the investing essentials that we do offer, I'll plug it, please just reach out and we can have a chat. All right. See you next time.
Awesome. Thank you.
See you at the next Australian Open.
Oh, very well.
Ran over 2 weeks.
The Total Money Management podcast is now releasing weekly. Follow us now on this app to stay up to date. And as always, remember, we don't provide financial advice.